Hi, and welcome to VIBEZ Daily. This is a daily devotional curated by VIBEZ Church to help you practice the way of Jesus and be all that God has called you to be. You have joined us for our year-long series titled Devoted. Acts 2:42 tells us that the followers of Jesus were devoted to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to breaking of bread, and to prayer. This podcast was created to provide context and commentary for what you read each day. Just before our friends begin discussing today's reading, we want to invite you not only for fellowship, but for prayer as well. We have created the VIBE Daily Chat Group to offer you fellowship and a community where you can state your observations, ask questions about the reading or the podcast. You can join us by downloading the VIBEZ Church app in your favorite app store. Click Join the Conversation and join us today. And finally, we hope that you can join us for prayer. Prayer happens Monday through Friday, and more information on that can be found on the VIBEZ Church app under prayer. Now, let's begin our conversation on today's reading.
All right, welcome to day 30 of the VIBEZ Daily podcast, our devoted series. So glad to be back here with my friends, my wife, Victoria, my friends, Shameeka and Dylan, as we continue to journey through Exodus. We have 4 more chapters to cover today, and so we'll jump right in. We have 25, 26, 27, and 28. So let's just jump in here to chapter 25. So we left off yesterday. We're primarily dealing with the laws that God gave Moses that he didn't pass on to the people, kind of ended with their agreement to live by those laws, everything he said we will do. And so then God gives Moses some instructions specifically to build a tabernacle, right? This is a place essentially of worship for people to come and meet with God, to offer sacrifices, some other things that this tabernacle served as a purpose. But it starts here in 25 and it really kind of dominates pretty much the majority of our reading today. So we can kind of, again, bounce around a little if we need to. But what did you guys see here in 25 as God starts to give these instructions for this tabernacle? What were some of the things that stuck out to you guys about how this comes together?
I think it was like the first couple of verses. That really spoke to me when the Lord is telling them to like take up a contribution from the people. Yeah. And it's like from everyone whose hearts are moved. Like,
Yep.
Like, and it wasn't like this obligation. It wasn't like, okay, I'm requiring 20% or, 2, whatever from each person. Yeah. I love that the Lord was like, I want this to be an offering. Like, because later in verse 8, he's like, let them make me a sanctuary that I might dwell in their midst. Like, so that like I'm doing this so that I can be with them. Right. Yeah. And so it's kind of like, I want your heart's desire to like want me to be with you. Yeah. Right. So it's like, I'm not even going to force you guys to make this happen. Like if your heart's desire, if you're moved, if you want this too, if you want this relationship too, then bring these things so that it can be accomplished.
Yeah. I love that. I love that you pointed it out because that was one of the things that stuck out to me is that one, the fact that God is allowing them to just partake in it. Like the fact that he's wanting to utilize their gifts and just even their things to accomplish this. Like he's God. He could have like just had this thing poof out of nothing and already be created, but he was giving them a chance to kind of like to be able to be a part of it with him. I thought was really cool. But there was one more thing I was gonna say. Oh, also, I feel like we're getting a little bit of a glimpse of what it looks like whenever we have like before Jesus hit the scene, for example. Like it's God, you got the Trinity and stuff, and like you see this personal relationship where God is like trying to get closer and closer and closer. And so I feel like this tabernacle is an example of like how God was very specific of having Jesus come on earth, and that was the closeness to us. Then eventually we have the Holy Spirit living inside of us. Like that's as close as you could get. I see him still finding ways of like, okay, I'm not just gonna be, a God that you heard about or even just in the clouds, so to speak, but like I'm making it a way to be even more tangible and personal for you. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, I was going to say something to that point too in verse 9. Is it verse 9? No, verse 8, I'm sorry. Have the people of Israel build me a holy sanctuary so I can live among them.
Yeah.
And I just go back to like, I think last week when I was just like, they saw God's presence at this mountain, and they were like, "Yeah, Moses, you got it. I'm not."
Yeah.
And I think like even the mere fact that God would be that close, even it's on a mountain, that close to his people, just shows how much he wants to be a part of their community. And like now he's like, okay, let me figure out a different way to be close to them.
Yeah.
That was cool.
And doesn't this come from like this whole Bible, right? This whole story, like even from the beginning of Genesis all the way to the end, is this like this redemption story of God wanting to come back into like communion with us and closeness with us. And so like I feel like I'm just watching this father like try to orchestrate things so that he can get back to this closeness with his children, right? Like that sin has wreaked havoc. And he's like, okay, I want to come down there. I want to be with you guys. I want to dwell with you guys. Like, this is my heart's desire. But I'm holy and you're not, right? Like, so create this tabernacle and we'll create this system so that you guys can get holy enough, right? And now pardon your sins through these animals that will eventually get to. This is the this is where I can dwell, okay? I can't just dwell in anything right now. Like, this is where I can dwell. It has to be this specific, like, so that I can be with you, because I feel like those things, like his heart's desire to be back in this community, like to be back in close proximity as much as he can right now.
Yeah. And I really feel like God is really setting himself apart for them. Like, it's like, what other God do you know that's like responding back to you, that's showing compassion, that's like going above and beyond? Like, you know, even when we eventually get to the point of, and they've already done this in history anyway, like having these like statues or like these like things, they can't talk back to you. Like, you don't see any of this stuff happening, but I feel like this is really that more things where God's just distinguishing himself to be one, a living God, like alive and active, but just so attentive to his people.
It's good. Yeah. I mean, again, it's a beautiful invitation to build this, and as you said, it's a voluntary participation, which is really interesting, and God does invite us to that, and it's definitely something that kind of continues. What do you guys make of just some of the descriptions? So, I mean, we get the ark, we get the table, the lampstand. These are some of the things that are described here in 25. Anything that just jumped out to you guys about what God's instructions were to design? Like, and I don't know, just kind of what came from that specifically. Anything in the rest of 25? When I say I have to go to each of them individually, but just any themes that you guys noticed or anything that stuck out to you?
I couldn't help but to think of Jesus being a carpenter.
Interesting.
You know, and just, just even to creation itself. Like, you think about photosynthesis, you think about cells and different, like, you just zoom in, you keep seeing these little living creatures that are around us all the time. And it's just like, God is so detailed, so specific about things. That I just love, like, I just look at words like, or sentences like 36 inches long and 18 inches wide and 27 inches high. It's like, why those numbers? Like, why is that so important, right? But it just shows how important it is to him. You know what I mean? Like, just each and everything that he has listed out.
You know
what I mean?
But I thought the same thing. I was even just looking at how many things, like the things that were supposed to be in close proximity to like God himself, like where he was going to dwell, was all gold. Like, I noticed there was no silver, no bronze up in here.
That's true.
And even verse 22, near this mercy seat is where he said that that's where he would meet with them. Like this, like in between the cherubim. Like, this is where I'm going to meet with them. But I was just looking at the description of it, and I was like, oh, this thing is like all gold, everything. And but when we get further along in some of the other chapters, when we look at the courtyard or some other things, it's bronze, it's silver, it's a little bit of gold here. But I love that, like, he just had this purity about the things he was closest to.
That's good.
And even what he used, like, just knowing that one, these aren't just like little cheap stuff. Like it's like fine things. Like even later on in the chapters, we'll hear about like the different pearls and emeralds, and like I'm just like this really beautiful thing. But also, what was interesting and I feel like this was also like a heart thing too, when God asked for those who were willing to bring an offering to bring it. God was the one that gave it to them anyway.
Right.
He told before they left Egypt to go ahead and squander that land. Good. To go ahead and they took the jewelry and all these different things from the Egyptians, and I feel like that was an opportunity for them to show like, am I gonna hold on to these possessions and like just be so closed fist, or will I be willing to give it up for a way bigger purpose, right? Like a way bigger meaning. So I thought that was interesting because they got that stuff from Egypt.
Yeah, I never thought about that.
Yeah, and you have to be willing to give it back.
That's so good, Shameeka.
It's another idea.
Colin over here.
That's so good. Oh, that's a real challenge, right?
Yeah.
Like it's the irony about it all. God is like, are you willing to give me back what I gave you?
Exactly.
Right? Like, and I'm only asking for a portion of it. Like, again, you didn't deserve this. You didn't work for this.
Yeah.
Like, this is literally what I gave you on the way out, and what I told you to happen.
God.
You didn't even earn this.
Yeah.
Are you still willing to give me back some of it? That's
Yeah, and to know that like not everybody gave an offering, but even what they got, it was a lot.
Yeah.
Like they literally had so much.
They had more than they needed. Yeah, by the time it's done.
Yeah, and I'm like, man, these they were pretty wealthy to have being in that place of like, man, I mean, you got tons and tons and tons.
That's good.
Rich in this wilderness.
Yeah.
I'm thinking like, as y'all talking, I'm like, let's go back to Egypt. Like he had planted this seed way back. Like he thought about the instructions that he would give and the amount of gold that it was going to be used back in Egypt. Like,
yeah. So he knew it was enough for them to carry out the plan.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
What you got to say?
Yeah, what you got to say?
Yeah. Hey, Colin's mouth wide open. What you got?
Like, first of all, like, this is why I was saying these aren't just about instructions and laws. This is about love.
Yeah.
Because he gave them all these things in Egypt because he wanted to see if they would give them back to me.
Yeah.
Because like when he told Moses, he says, let my people go so that they can worship me in the wilderness.
Yeah.
And a part of them receiving the golds and the pearls and emeralds was to give it back to him in worship. And so I was like, when you said that, that's what I thought about. But we need to get rich in the wilderness on a shirt.
No, look. Yeah, when you said that, like, they went on. I was stuck here for a sec. Like, they were rich in the wilderness, wealthy in the wilderness.
They
like,
were. That is crazy, though, right?
Yeah.
Complaining.
I just wanted to know I'm not cutting any of this out.
Wealthy.
Anyway,
Exactly.
Make sure, make
one of these cameras picked up Colin's audio.
Water, but I need to throw it.
Yo,
That was a good aim.
That's good. No, that's so good.
Oh my goodness.
That's so good, man. No, that's
Water
amazing.
bottle ministry.
That's amazing. That is so much there in that. And just a simple ask, right?
Yeah.
There's so many layers to that.
Such a gentleman.
What he was asking of the
You know,
Lord.
right.
But
He's like, yeah, if I want.
they still have free will.
yeah, just that, again, it's an invitation. And
Yeah.
we all have that same invitation. He's not going to force us, right? He's not going to make us. Oh, man, that's so good. I'll say some of the things that just jumped out to me. I do love the instructions being written down here. Like, there's a part of me that when I think about what the Lord said and what's applicable to my life, right? And like why, thinking of the Bible as a book of instruction for me to live.
Yeah.
Like there's a part of me that goes, is this super relevant to my life, right? Like how this tabernacle is created and what the instructions are and the details are. But I think it's less about, at least for me, right, as a person thousands of years later, it's less about the description of the tabernacle and its instructions, but more about even what it just models for us and just, writing things down and being clear with instructions and details and plans and execution that mattered to God. Like he didn't just do things willy-nilly off the, flying by the seat of his pants and I'm just going to improvise. Like he had a plan. Back to what, Dylan has brought up. Like he had this planned out before, back in Egypt. Like he knew what it was going to take for this year, or way before this. And so like, I think it's important for me to say, okay, rather than just being a visionary and just saying like, okay, God, this is some of the things that, I think wants to happen. Like, write it down, like get some instructions, because who this also helps. This helps the generations that came after, right? So like when stuff gets stolen or destroyed and they have to rebuild and do those things, like they got instructions. Like when the temple, which is constructed later and then ultimately destroyed, like they literally have instructions of how to rebuild it. Yeah. Because it's down here. And I go, God, like what are those things that I am not being clear writing down for those that may just come after me to know kind of what to do next? Where there's a succession plan, there's some things that are clear. So again, as much as I wanted to just kind of breeze through this, like, I don't need this now. Like, I'm not building a tabernacle anytime in the near future. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I still wanted to take away from it that like God was intentional about writing every one of these instructions down, not just for Moses and those people, but for those thereafter to see as well.
So detailed, man.
And for who he used, like, we'll be able to see that later on, but like he had already given different gifts and talents to people to be able to execute it, like and it'll continue to say in scripture, like it's not like, oh, somebody just had a little side hustle. He's like, no, these are embroiderers. Like this is like some fine talent and giftings, and I just think that's so special, like just how God equipped the people and allowed them again to have opportunity to take part in it.
Yeah,
I love that you mentioned that, because I was sitting here thinking about when you were saying, what does this mean for me? I was thinking about how much time it took them to do these things. Like we just read it, but like when I'm even just thinking about like how many rings had to be like the gold melted and then like
50 loops, right?
Yeah,
on
50 loops. Like how long did it take you to do these 50
loops on the other?
Yeah, and then I'm looking at like in chapter 26 now we're going to these yarns and these big old curtains and these long curtains. And I'm like, whoa, these curtains were huge. Yeah. And they didn't have a little sewing machine or anything. There are no like factories or anything. And so I was literally saying like, how long? So that's what I was thinking, like
in the wilderness.
In the wilderness, right? Like, how long did it take them to do these things? And I'm like, well, God, I don't feel like he's asking me to do stuff that's that laborious, right? Like, I just feel like he's probably is asking us to do these things that is going to be very time consuming. Yeah. And it's going to take a while. And like you said, back to that word devotion, like, are we going to be devoted enough? Like, are we going to be like honoring God enough with our time and our talents to get done what he's asking us to do? Because like you said, I'm looking at these are mostly probably men that he asked. Like the ones that he named were men, right? And I'm like, well, they should be using this craft as embroiderers or whatever and sculptors, like to be making money, right, for their family and providing. And I feel like they're taking this time to do this for the Lord and trusting that like he's going to be providing for their large families. There's a lot of them.
Yeah,
that's good.
I always think like instead of, because to me, if I was in this situation and not knowing, like having knowledge of the future generation, what this Ark of the Covenant might mean for another generation, right? Yeah. Like still this blind obedience to still do what he's asked us to do. Like just for today, like if he asked me to do something weird, like go up to that person or whatever the case may be, like just not be so selfish in my thinking of like, this is for me. Me being obedient is, I will be blessed from my obedience when it's like, one, I'm being blessed because I'm being obedient. You know what I mean?
Right.
And on top of that, it's for somebody else. Like it could be possibly for somebody else. This is something that I struggle with.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Anything else? I mean, again, kind of taking 25 through 27 probably as a whole now.
Yeah.
We have these different pieces: ark, table, lampstand, tabernacle, altar for burnt offerings, the courtyard, oil. Anything else that just jumped out to you guys in those chapters? Some of the descriptors of what was created. Any other themes or anything that jumped out to you guys?
How do you pronounce the wood? I keep
The acacia.
Acacia. I don't know why I kept thinking acai bowl. Acacia.
So hungry.
I'm like acai wood.
Come on, that's hilarious.
No, but I was wondering.
pretty good, though.
I mean, maybe you have an answer to this, but I was just like, why that wood? Why that type of tree? I looked it up. That tree looks very beautiful. I don't know if y'all ever seen the tree. It to me, it looks like a description of like the tree of life. Like it's really cool.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Like the specific.
I mean, it would add up, right? That's back to what Victoria has pointed out. I mean, it's been the finest of materials that the earth has to offer that has come together to make this, right? And I do think it does speak to not just God's. You know, we've talked a lot about His holiness. I don't know how much we have reflected on His majesty, right? Just like how majestic and royal God is, right? Like He is a king. You know what I'm saying? So I just see him reaching for the water bottle.
Right.
I can't even finish my thought now. But like he's a king, right? And I think that's why it was built this way with the finest of materials, because it's like you are building a throne for the king of the universe. Yeah. Like we're not just gonna make it off of, you know, twigs and sticks we found, you know, and no offense to Jacob and Bethel, but it's not just a couple stones I found, you know, laying on the ground. Like, no, I'm building a home and a dwelling place for the king of the universe. So yeah, like it would make sense that we're going to find the finest wood available, and the finest threads and yarns available, and the finest precious metals available and stones. And so, yeah, it would add up, man. Absolutely, that this tree would also reflect that when you look at it.
And it reminds me of Eden. Like there were some things in Eden that they talked about where we did hear about gold and like different pearls or just different things being in Eden. And so again, it is like this is almost in a sense like the new Eden. Like you still see how God again like created a space that was just so beautiful, like you said, so majestic, and like His heart longs for it to be, you know, how it was. But yet He's still making a way.
Yeah.
You pass me my water bottle, please.
I'm scared you're gonna throw it.
You gotta take his weapon away.
It's not a weapon. It's an affirmation tool, utensil.
That's hilarious. Good. Okay. Well, in that same vein, I mean, he doesn't just stop at, which is, I love this. But anyway, he doesn't just stop at the dwelling place. He then gives instructions for the people who will dwell with him, right? And beside him, we get to 28, and he deals with these priestly garments, and gives instructions for how even the people who will come before him should look and be. Anything you got that jumped out to you guys in 28 specifically?
Shout out to Colin, man. He said something last week while we were offline. I think we mentioned it, but like this imagery of Moses being God and then Aaron being the priest or prophet, and you just seeing it happen literally in 28.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love in verse 3, it's like, again, like Shameeka was saying how he had like given these gifts to these people to use, and so it's like he's filled, in my version, he filled a spirit of skill into them. And so I was just like, I just love it. I'm like, Lord, what skill have you filled me with? And like, how can I be giving this back to you? Right. And I do love that, like you said, when God's asking us to do something, like He's going to equip us. Like, as we see later on, like He actually points certain people out by name. And I do love that, like, yes, I'm with Moses. I'm face to face with Moses. But here, I'm going to put my spirit in him. I'm going to put my spirit in them. Like, I'm going to equip them. And I love that part. But then I also love this. I was really curious also. I'm sorry, I'm switching subjects, but over to verse 28, where they call this breastpiece of judgment here. And they're talking about this breastpiece here. And I had to look into the Tony Evans commentary, because I was like, what does this breastpiece of judgment mean? And it was saying that, like, God spoke to Moses directly, but that's not how he always spoke to the priest. Like, that's not how he was always going to speak to the priest. It was like this direct one-on-one like conversation. And so they used this Urim and Thummim in some type of way to discern and discover God's will. Yeah. And so I thought that was really interesting. That's something that I just learned. I was like, well, what is this Urim and Thummim? What is this? But it's just how they learned how to discern. But if anybody else had more on that.
That's really cool.
Yeah. I was naive.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting because you also hear the phrase like casting lots and some other stuff kind of throughout the Old Testament. It is interesting. God gave them, it's essentially like these kind of rocks or stones is what these things were. And when they were in tough decisions that they could not kind of discern the will of God in that specific decision that may not have been felt like a right or wrong, black or white, this is so easy to kind of figure out based off of law, they would use these. Essentially, almost it was to some on the outside, it may look like by chance, right? Like we're just gonna almost like roll a dice, and wherever it lays, it tells us kind of which way to go. But they would use it in kind of that manner, but they trusted it as a device. I mean, this is something God gave them to help them to make those wise decisions. So it is very interesting because again, as an outsider, I'm just kind of like, well, that's just by chance. But from as God instructed, it was not about chance, but instead it was, again, about wisdom and about discernment.
Well, I have a question because, my Bible has pictures and stuff in it, which was cool. But it's seeing and reading like the different parts of the outfit for the priests. Thinking as a 24-year-old of 2024, like I would think, oh man, you can come as you are, you know what I'm saying? Flip flops, whatever the case may be. Do you feel like don't do me? Do you feel like that God still holds like that, I guess, important to him today? Like, does that kind of make, that's a weird question.
No, I mean, I think it's a good question, right? Like, I think it's hard to, I agree with you. I think it's hard to read this, again, back to think about his majesty and how majestic he is and holy he is, and look at all that he had people go through just to be in his presence, and somehow come away from that and say, oh yeah, I can just come to Jesus in my, tank top and flip flops, right? Like it can feel conflicting to feel that way. And so I do think it's a fair question. I'd love to hear some other thoughts, but I think, obviously there is some delineation between this time where there is no savior, right? At this point, like Jesus has not come. Like a lot of what was done here is because we were so wretched in the eyes of God. All of this was necessary just to get close, right? Like we couldn't even, we couldn't see him. He didn't dwell within us, like none of that. Like this was just to get close. We had to kind of do all of this. And so there is a difference, in my opinion, what that took. And then I think the other thing for me is I also just like to, I like to fast forward, right? When you look at the teachings of Jesus and you look at some of the apostles, they didn't go through this to get close to God, right? Like I look at, it wasn't like Jesus was putting this on every day. Like he wasn't walking around town in this outfit, right? While he preached the gospel. Same thing with Paul and Peter and these other fishermen and things of that nature. Like they weren't wearing this and then also saying the Spirit of God dwells within. Like they said the Spirit of God dwelt within, and they were probably just in their regular tunics and whatever else they kind of walked through. And so that's just kind of some of what I saw. But I don't know, any other like thoughts on that? Like what do you come away with when you think about how much they went through to just be in the presence of God?
Yeah, I think I have the same thought of like this was pre-Jesus. Like we have the privilege of living in the post-Jesus like world right now, where he has saved us and redeemed us. But I think, to your point though, it probably should be a little bit more self-reflection on our part when we speak to God and when we come into his presence, to even still acknowledge who he is. And so whether we do it with our clothes or not, like our heart posture should be that of reverence, right?
Yes.
And not, because I think where some of the religious leaders fell into their traps when Jesus came onto the scene was they thought that they were holy because of the things that they wore and the things that they did. And, and okay, I'm the priest and I wear this and I get close to God, so I'm holy. But like the Lord has always throughout this entire book has looked at the heart of man. Like, do you love me? Do you revere me? Do you want me to be your one and only true God, right? Or is it self-gratifying? Or are you pumping yourself up, right? And so I think for me, what the takeaway from me is like, wow, they had to do all of this to get close to God, and he's close to me. Am I doing all that I can for the Lord right now? Like, is my heart willing to do everything for him to make sure that I can be, because at the end of the day, sin still drives us away from God, right? Like, sin still creates division and separation, although I do have a savior. And so it's just like, in my mind, it's like, how do I live a righteous, because I'm called to be righteous and holy before him still. So how do I live this life and posture my actions to be holy unto him, not because I make myself holy, but just out of reverence to him and wanting to be close to him. Like, how do I still live in a way that says, God, you're majestic. God, I can't even get close to you. Like, you shouldn't be dwelling in me, but since you are, let me give you everything that I have.
I'm glad you said that, because the scripture that keeps popping up to me is 1 Peter 2:9, where it talks about us being a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. And like, what that says to me is that, like, we're in a time right now where we see that he did grant like Aaron and them as priests. We're the priests now. Like, he's given us that same authority as the priest. And so I do think it is a heart posture thing that you're saying, is that like, how we reverent God and how we make sure we're keeping ourselves sacred and holy and set apart, because he literally tells us, like, we're all here as believers, like a royal priesthood, for the purpose of glorifying him. And it's the same, like, the agenda is the same, the command is the same, the mission is the same. Is that, like, ultimately, like, I want to use you guys to glorify me, so that people could know me. And so that would be my feedback to that, because that scripture just keeps popping up as I see the priest and all those different things. Is that, like, man, God, like, you've given us that authority. And we're not even the Israelites, like, we're not even the Jews, we're the Gentiles, but yet, like, you've given us the ability to be your royal priesthood. And so we should carry ourselves as such.
I think a couple of chapters before, he even says, like, you guys will be a nation of priests.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. That's good. Now I think that's a good takeaway from this kind of as a whole, right? Like, from all of this, I love that you pointed that out, right? Our heart posture is the piece that it's our heart that we're taking before God now, right? It's not our clothes, it's not the tabernacle, it's not the ark, it's not that, like, what we take before God. And this is what, Jesus taught, like you said, like, it's not, what goes in your mouth that defiles you, like, it's what comes out, right? It's from your heart that God cares. And so, I think, the answer to that and really to all of this is, what we should reflect on is what kind of heart are we bringing before him, and what does that look like specifically? So,
and we don't. I was going to say, we don't have the breast piece per se, but we do have the breastplate of righteousness. Like, that is literally still an armor and something that God has clothed us with, that he's given us to be able to have. And to that point, like, the breastplate is righteousness. And so it is still our part to be right, standing with him and walking that way.
That's good. I'm too churchy.
That's good. Okay.
I did want to point out before we close out soon that I just love how God honored Jacob's sons, the 12 sons, and made this memorial for them. It talked about, I think it might have been on the garment of the priest, where it says, like, the names were bore of the sons of Israel over his heart on the breastpiece of decisions as a continuing memorial before the Lord. And so I thought that was special, because God is still making sure from generation to generation that they're not forgotten. That this is still, like, an important piece in lineage and generation of the Israelites. And in this way, their legacy is continuing, and God is making sure from generation to generation that they're known. So to be included in that's special.
It is. And even to think about how we kind of thought about them a few days ago, right? We went over the story of Leah and Rachel and the hot mess drama that family was, right? And even just how some of these sons were born. Yeah. But yet God was like, I'm using each and every one of them still in my plan. And like you said, we see this continued reverence, towards the names of those tribes now from generation to generation. So it's like, although I read it as they going outside God's will and they just grabbing servants and having babies, like God still had a plan. Yeah. Each and every one of them.
Mm-hmm. That's good. That's good. Okay. We have some more instructions to go over tomorrow. But this is really good conversation. So thank you guys for all that you shared. And if you have thoughts, reflections, please share them with us. Comment section, our chat in the Vibes app, any of that. But hopefully this has been helpful for you. See you guys tomorrow for 4 more chapters. Take care.
Thank you for joining us for the VIBEZ Daily podcast. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or download our favorite, the VIBEZ Church app. Visit vibes.church/devoted for additional episodes, notes, details, and the latest merch.